Hi, and welcome to BioStock Studio. And today we have with us Klaus Elsborg Olesen, CEO of Initiator Pharma. Klaus, could you start off with telling us a bit about Initiator Pharma? What do you do?
Yes, of course, and thank you for having me today. Yeah, Initiator Pharma is a clinical stage biotech company based out of Denmark, but you can say operating as a global biotech. In Initiator Pharma, we focus on proteins that are called monoamine transporters. So they transport specific signal molecules in the brain. It's a diverse class of proteins transporting dopamine and serotonin and a lot of other components. So what we have focused on is molecules that can modulate the function of these proteins. So we can actually inhibit the transport. Thereby we can change the balance of the serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain. And this is applicable in a lot of diseases. So our first indication is erectile dysfunction, but it is the same for neuropathic pain. It can be for depression. There's a lot of things, places where you have medical conditions that is dependent on the levels and the balance of dopamine and serotonin.
Where are you in the process right now in taking these drugs to the market?
Yeah, so we can say that. So on our two first lead candidates is iPET 2015, which is what we call classical erectile dysfunction drug. Is what we call organic erectile dysfunction, and that is what you normally see when you become 40 years old or older. You start, having problems getting the erection, and it's driven by, lifestyle, overweight, a lot of time people with diabetes, and we start seeing that they get problems with the erection. So they got what we call erectile dysfunction. So that compound we took we developed all the way from the preclinical stage through a phase 1 into the phase 2A, where we demonstrated in a cohort of 12 patients that 25% of these various, what we call moderate to severe erectile dysfunction patients actually responded to the treatment in a classical setting where we showed them a stimulation video and then we measured the erection. So there we completed the phase 2A trial, and we have demonstrated that it works for these patients, and we are very positive about that, because it's important to remember that even though there's a lot of treatments out there for erectile dysfunction, like the Viagras or Cialis, that all belong to the same family of what we call PDE5 inhibitors. They are very good for a lot of patients, but about 30 to 40% of all patients suffering from erectile dysfunction do not respond to this medication. And those are exactly the patients that we go in and target. So we will never be a competitor to the Viagra and the Cialis. We will take out that big segment of the market that do not respond properly to the current treatment. So that now with the phase 2 proof of concept, we are looking forward to continue our business development on this asset, trying to identify a development partner or a direct sale and out license of the asset so we can continue the development of the other things that we have in the pipeline. The second thing we have in the pipeline is the 2018 compound. The 2018 compound is all for erectile dysfunction, but it's what we refer to as psychogenic erectile dysfunction. So this actually is independent of age. It can hit very young men, and it's driven by a lot of different, reasons than the organic one. So here we're actually saying that, anxiety, performance anxiety, stress, depression, some of these things actually all drives this psychogenic erectile dysfunction. So here we need a compound that has a little bit of the different composition. So because not only do we need to strengthen the sexual function, so by having a dopamine component, but we also need to handle this, psychogenic depression. So that what we see a little bit of depression, and this we can do by including a serotonin component. And 2018 is just that compound. It has a very nice profile between dopamine for the sexual function and the serotonin component for the, you can say, the psychogenic dysfunction. So this is where we are, and this is a thing that we just filed as clinical trial application in March, and we're looking forward to get the approval during the summer of 2020 and start, the clinical trial soon after.
The next question I was going to ask you was, can you tell us about the data you have seen from the study so far? You told us a bit about them. Is there anything else there you wanted to say about?
So you can say on the 2015, we are actually very pleased with the data that comes out. You can say that the data that comes out supports the whole notion that we actually, by changing the level of dopamine, actually induce the erection. This is something that, a lot of people have demonstrated in animal models, and we too have demonstrated that. But now we actually see in patients that are not very, what we really bad erectile dysfunction patients. So these are not just people who's maybe sometimes experience it. It's actually people who have a consistent problem with this and do not really respond to the common treatment. So we're actually really glad to see that we actually work in that setting. And then also we learned a lot about the properties of the compound. We see, we understand what's the plasma levels of the compound, when do we see the Cmax, so that means when do we have most of it in plasma, and all this correlate to what we have seen in animal studies and actually validates, you can say our hypothesis of what we're doing forward. So actually we are very happy with the 2015 results. Now it's going to be interesting with the 2018. So we've done the same kind of things in the animal work there. We know we actually have a lot of clinical data already on the 2018 compound from the previous study that was done before our time. And that we can compare to what we have seen in the animals. And here again, we have a very good correlation between the plasma levels and the how the drug behaves when it gets into the bloodstream. So that we're looking forward to.
How big is the market for these type of indications?
Yeah, so organic ED is a very changing market at the moment, because now the patents for Cialis or for Viagra is disappearing. Cialis disappears very soon, so they had the 20 years of exclusivity there. We actually can see that now I know in Denmark and Sweden we can actually see the usage of Viagra is actually increasing. This could be, of course, driven by the lower price because it's now generic, but it could also be what we actually also see in the literature, that more and more people actually use Viagra because they stay sexually active for longer, and the older you get, the more likelihood you have of getting ED. So we see an increased use here. At the peak sales, they were selling between 5 to 6 billion US a year for these compounds. So majority was Cialis and Viagra taking this market. Levitra also had a portion of this market. So you can say it's a fairly large market. We know that there's about 20 million prescription users in the US and in Europe, so it's a lot of patients there. And looking back and saying, okay, how many patients do we are able to treat? 30 to 40% of this segment is millions of patients. And with a drug pricing in the similar fashion as what we saw for Viagra when it first launched, we're looking at blockbuster potential with $1 billion revenue plus for these compounds. And again, we will not be competing with the others. So they are kind of cannibalizing on one another. We will be the only one for the non-responders.
You are now raising capital. How much capital are you raising, and how are you going to use the capital?
So what we did with this, we actually got a direct investment from Formue Nord, an institutional investor in Denmark based out of Aalborg, very active life science investor. So we got them on board, and together with a rights issue to our current shareholders and a warrant program associated to that, we actually will get about 23 million, if fully exercised all the way, 23 million Swedish into the finance box of Initiator Pharma. That will cover the whole clinical development of the 2018 compound, so the whole phase 2A trial, which will be some way similar to the IP 2015 trial. They will probably consist of one more arm and maybe a few more patients because of this. And then you can say, besides that, a small portion of the money will go into developing the business development side of this. So going back to the people that had an interest in 2018 from the beginning, who was actually looking for a compound that could work with these psychogenic patients. And then, of course, it will also support the continued development of 2015, especially on the business development side.
Are you planning on taking these drugs on the market by yourself, or are you looking for a partner, licensing, or?
Yeah, I think that to sit today and say that I'm going to start distributing this mass product to the whole world is going to be very, very difficult for us. I definitely think that we need to find a partner where this compound matches into their portfolio. So somebody who has an interest in male health, in erectile dysfunction, who has the sales force to actually distribute these compounds, so we get out to all the GPs around the world so they can start subscribing these. And I think that the best way to do that is finding this partner where it fits into the pipeline, and that means that we will not take it all the way. It could be that we originally need to be a development partner for the pharmaceutical company because of the expertise we have in these studies. So it could be we need to help them doing the phase 2B study, or it could be that just do it themselves. So there's different options there. And just to kind of open up the perspectives for potential acquirers of the compounds, we kind of laid out what is the development plan going forward. How is the phase 2B going to look? How many patients do we need? And what is the phase 2, the registration trial? So there's a path for them to go in. So we used our expertise to build an optimal platform so they can kind of buy the whole package and developing from there.
Last question, what milestones do you expect to achieve in the near future?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we submitted the MTA for the 2018 compound, and we expect to have the the CTA approval during Q2 or the summer of 2020. So that should be fairly soon. We have a good track record, and that last time we also managed really fast to get the approval of our clinical trial application, and so that's the first immediate one coming up. In connection with that, of course, we have the rights issue that is ongoing these days. So that is very important that we actually, so even though it's fully committed, so we have a guaranteed subscribe for the whole amount, we would actually very much like all the existing shareholders to be part of this, to become part of the journey going forward. We know that the stock market has been volatile over the COVID-19, but we still believe that we have a very good proposition to the shareholders, and we want to include them in this. And also, this way we will actually drive the company forward. And we have more than 3,500 shareholders, and there's a lot of people supporting us, and we want to continue that and earn their trust by demonstrating that we can develop another compound and demonstrate again in the clinic that it actually works for these indications and helping these patients. Maybe I'm saying that, of course, the really important one you can say, of course, is doing some kind of transaction on the 2015, making sure that there's a continued development of that program. So we get in a situation where, either in a sale, an out license, or a partnership, get that compound going forward, so we can start creating more value on that. And then in the first half of 2021, we'll have the readout from the 2018 trial, the psychogenic erectile dysfunction, and having that, and that'll be really important milestones in the near future.
Interesting. We look forward to follow you, Klaus, and Initiator Pharma. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you very much for having me.